Ready to get started, everyone? All right. All right, our next presentation is Modeling Electric Grid Resistance to Wildfire. Brian Pierre? Okay, whenever you're ready, we'll get you started.
Is that on? All right, well, thank you for having me, Madam Chair, Representatives, Senators, thank you. It's an honor to be here. A little bit of my background. I've been doing electric power systems pretty much my whole life. First conference I attended for power systems, I was 7 years old, so it's been a while. And then I grew up in Wyoming, went to Boise State for undergrad in Idaho, down to Arizona State for my master's and PhD focused on power systems. And then looked at the national labs and decided that Sandia was the best fit for me, and have been here for almost 11 years now. I have a wife and 2 little kids. Just started preschool and first grade. They're great. And with that, I'll dive into the talk today. So I manage our power systems research department. It's in our electric grid security program. That includes 5 departments led by Charles Hanley. And there's a lot of topic areas in our electric grid security program, all about securing the electric infrastructure for North America, the U.S., from the bulk system all the way down to distribution and microgrids at the community level. Today I'll focus on wildfire electric grid security. This program space on to slide 2. I also have the slides up here because there are a couple slides that have videos and things like that at some point I'll point to up here as well. This space primarily has 2 goals. So the first is mitigating electric grid ignited wildfires. And anytime I talk with utilities or co-ops, this is one of their top priorities, is trying to make sure that the electric infrastructure does not start wildfires. So they're doing a lot of work in that space. Almost every utility we talk to is very focused in this. And the second goal is to mitigate the consequence of these large-scale wildfires to critical infrastructure and the electric grid. On to slide 3. These wildfire impacts are drastic. So here's kind of an intro slide to some of the largest scale wildfires in the western U.S. over the last decade. It includes a couple of these large-scale wildfires in New Mexico recently, including Hermit's Peak Fire back in 2022. There's also wildfires, of course, now everywhere that are significant, not just in the western U.S. As things change and wildfires seem to become more prevalent, especially these large-scale events. The impacts of these wildfires, the loss of life, the impacts to society, loss of property, the damage to critical infrastructure is significant, and business impacts as well. Specifically in the context of this talk, the business impacts to utilities and co-ops can be significant. Then there's supply chain impacts as well. So for the electric infrastructure, there are some components that are very hard to get, especially large-scale transformers, that if they are knocked out of service or damaged, it can take years to find replacements, and there's not many spares just sitting around. And then there's 2 pieces here on insurance and lawsuits. This is not a topic area for scientists at Sandia, but we know that it's a huge piece of the wildfire space right now. On to the next slide. Our wildfire electric grid security program, we primarily break it up into 4 different areas. So the first is pre-wildfire. This is early warning and real-time monitoring of wildfire risk. The next piece is during the wildfire from the ignition event itself, so trying to mitigate those ignitions and mitigate the consequence of those wildfires by modeling the wildfire spread, for example. And then next is post-wildfire. So this is after the wildfire has occurred. You have crews stationed outside the wildfire perimeter area, and once you're given the green light that it's safe to go in, how to optimize the recovery process to restore service to critical loads and to customers in need. And then the last area, which also circles back to the front in a full circle, is planning for future wildfires. So this is where you can't gold plate the system. You don't have infinite resources. You're going to have to optimize what investments you make to mitigate wildfire ignitions and mitigate the consequence of these large-scale wildfires. So the first topic area I'm going to get into is focused around the planning and monitoring for these wildfires. And before you can even really get into planning and monitoring, you need to look at history for past wildfires to help inform decisions for future wildfires. And so a lot of this is focused on what conditions and drivers led to these large-scale wildfires and the wildfires that caused the most consequence. So I point to primarily two rows on this table. One is the high winds and dry grasses or dry vegetation. And almost every single one of these large-scale wildfires that cause major consequence, those two things are very prevalent. For firefighters, high winds is awful because it causes it to be extremely hard to contain these wildfires when you have high winds that are just throwing embers everywhere. So those are two of the most prevalent drivers leading to these large-scale wildfires. And then you throw in drought, high heat, other fuels and other dry vegetation, low humidity, and then you have these perfect conditions for large-scale wildfires. On to the next one, a little bit more about wildfire risk in New Mexico specifically. So the lines on these maps for New Mexico are transmission lines throughout New Mexico, and then on the right is a heat map showing historical fires that have occurred in New Mexico. So this gives you an idea of where fires are most prevalent in New Mexico. Specifically, you can see down the hot spot down in the Gila National Forest. That has been quite an area of emphasis for this program space in partnership with PNM, our local utility, of course, working with them down in the Gila National Forest to mitigate wildfire risk in that area. A lot of our demonstrations are also in that area. On the next slide, we're focused on wind again. So understanding the wind in your area significantly can change the risk of wildfire in an area. So on the screen here, it's a GIF actually of wind speeds sustained or gusts of different miles per hour versus the static image on the slide deck that you see. And so this again helps us point out specific areas that are of most interest and highest consequence for large-scale wildfires. So one of the first pieces whenever we talk about wildfire modeling in the wildfire space is better understanding the vegetation characteristics in a certain region. So for example, for utilities and co-ops, one of the main things to look at is the vegetation in their rights-of-way and around their rights-of-way for their distribution lines and transmission lines. So having these up-to-date vegetation models and fuel models is the primary input that if you have very accurate vegetation data, then you can have accurate wildfire spread models. So one way we do this is you use satellite imagery data that you've trained on ground truth data for our machine learning algorithms. And so we, for example, went down to the Gila National Forest with some of our techs and scientists at Sandia in partnership with PNM. We took ground truth measurements under their transmission and distribution lines so that we could have something to train our data sets from satellite imagery on so that we could better understand the vegetation under and around those transmission and distribution assets. So now you can take satellite imagery and use it on other parts of New Mexico, for example, or other regions that have similar vegetation characteristics as from our ground truth data set. And so this lets us use satellite imagery data to get better understanding of the vegetation around certain regions of New Mexico. We use that in a lot of our wildfire modeling work. One of the specific things with utilities and co-ops that we're partnering again with PNM on is for dynamic wildfire risk maps. So instead of a static map that just says this is a high wildfire risk area, it is instead updating in more of a real-time sense based on that satellite imagery data as up-to-date as you can get it. That allows us these dynamic, accurate, machine learning derived vegetation characteristics for around their assets. And then you combine that with real-time weather data and you can get a better idea of more of your real-time wildfire risk, which can be of of great use for planning and monitoring and early response for utilities and others. The next piece is where we combine wildfire modeling with grid modeling. And so this is where we're trying to find vulnerabilities of the grid to wildfires. So if a wildfire has started and you model the spread of that wildfire over the next hours, days, and you can identify, okay, in the next 2 to 4 hours, this transmission line might be impacted by this wildfire. Well, hopefully that information allows the utility to help redispatch sources and be able to mitigate the consequence to the customers if you have that information ahead of time. And so this work is also looking at cascading outages. So these are the largest scale outages in the history. They're some of the worst consequences for the U.S. when you have huge cascading outages that affect an entire region of the country. The 1996 blackout on the West Coast, the 2003 blackout in the Northeast U.S. Those are very rare events, but if they do happen, they're extremely consequential. So what we're trying to look at is if a wildfire is spreading and it takes out one line, and then there's another wildfire somewhere else, maybe even in another state, that takes out a different line, a generator goes down because of maintenance for another reason. You have all these, we call them N-1 type of events. N being the number of components you have, one line goes down, another line goes down later, and so forth. Finally, we're worried that there's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and you have this cascading outage that occurs and takes out an entire region of the country. So those are the events that almost never happen, but we're trying to make sure that they never happen, right? And then the last item on here is optimizing those investment decisions to mitigate wildfires. So this is where you have different options, and so you have to decide what's right for your part of the country and your region or your utility, because there's no one-size-fits-all solution. I was at a wildfire conference recently, and one very large utility that has a lot of wildfire risk got up, and they mentioned that a huge part of their program is to underground distribution lines that are in high wildfire risk areas. And so the cost to underground a distribution line is somewhere from $2 million to $6 million per mile. So very expensive. It is a great solution to mitigate wildfires, and it made sense for this large utility to do this in certain regions. After they got up and mentioned that strategy for their program space, a small co-op in a forested region stood up and mentioned there's no way we can underground all of our distribution through the forest because the cost is just far too much. So the number of customers they serve per mile is very low, and that means that the cost of undergrounding for millions and millions of dollars would pass on to very few customers, and that's not feasible. So their focus was vegetation management. So they were all about using new technologies, making sure that there's no vegetation that's close to any of their lines and distribution lines that can come in contact with those lines, cause an arc, and possibly ignite a fire. And so that's one of the main goals. And so I'll go on to the next slide here. So I mentioned more of a real-time monitoring of wildfire risk. This work is primarily focused on forecasting wildfire risk in months in advance. This says the next fire season, but really the fire season seems to be almost all year round at this point. So in this case, what we're doing, again, using satellite imagery and machine learning on that imagery to help predict vegetation growth in a certain area for up to 6 months ahead. We combine that with seasonal forecasts and long-term weather forecasts, and with that information, get a better idea of the vegetation and moisture levels in that vegetation in different regions of our country, our state, our region. And with that information, that can help with planning for these large-scale wildfires. And so if you have that information of this part is looking in the next 6 months to be a possible hotspot for a wildfire, that can be good information to have when planning for wildfires. The next slide is focused on public safety power shutoffs. So public safety power shutoff is when the utility decides to preemptively turn off power to customers because it's been determined that it is in their best interest to turn off the power because how high of a wildfire risk it is at that moment in time. So this is when the winds are just hurricane level winds, you have extremely dry vegetation, There hasn't been rain in weeks, and it's all these perfect conditions for these very drastic wildfires. So P&M, for example, did their first public safety power shutoff back in April, and utilities in California have done these quite frequently as well. And so there's this balancing act of optimizing minimizing the impact to customers and load shedding, while you're also trying to not compromise wildfire risk. So there's this trade-off here that is quite difficult. All right, next is a tool that is under development at Sandia. We just demoed it to P&M last week, actually, and it is focused, it's called PyroKit, and it's focused on, we mainly are focused on small utilities and co-ops. What we've realized is when we talk with large utilities, they have entire teams of people that are dedicated to wildfire risk mitigation. It's more the rural locations and co-ops and smaller utilities that don't have the resources to do an entire wildfire mitigation plan, or at least as in depth as when you have a team of 50 people doing it. And so hopefully we plan to partner with P&M with this, along with others in the future, where we can provide this tool to help them with dynamic wildfire risk maps, understanding future burn probabilities, customizing public safety power shutoff calculations, which takes a lot of input from that utility. And then contingency analysis. This is where we combine the grid modeling with the wildfire modeling, and then also some scenario analysis for mitigation solutions. So seeing trade-offs between different solutions. I'll briefly mention there's a lot of wildfire tools out there that each have their own specific need in the wildfire community. Of course, the U.S. Forest Service does a lot of this. CAL FIRE has done a lot of this for decades, and Missoula Fire Lab. Many of them have tools that do certain things for wildfire spread modeling and other aspects. So now I'm going to get into the ignition piece. So this is where we're looking at trying to mitigate wildfire ignitions. First step is lightning. So lightning modeling at Sandia, we have a lightning strike lab where we can hit different objects with lightning strikes of different energy and current, and we want to see how those objects react to being hit by lightning. In our case, what we're using it for is hitting different vegetation with different moisture levels with a lightning strike and seeing if it ignites. And so from doing this thousands of times, hopefully you can create this experimentally driven computation model to understand the predictability of a lightning ignited wildfire. You combine that with the second area of research is focused on monitoring lightning systems. And so if you can better monitor lightning storms for the total lightning current and energy, you combine that capability with that computation model to see predictability of lightning ignited fires. Those two together, hopefully when there's a lightning storm, you can get a good idea of whether or not that lightning storm is going to be igniting fires in that location. This can help with early response to possible wildfires from lightning. Next is arc modeling. This is in a similar light as the lightning related work, where on the grid there are faults. And so a fault is when you have an arc go from, for example, across an insulator from the conductor to the steel tower. And so that arc has an energy piece to it, and we want to understand the probability of arcs like that igniting certain vegetation. So that is another piece of this program, at least in the future as well. There's been less of this done so far compared to the lightning-related work in this program space. Also, the second piece of this is smoke debris can build up on insulators. And as that smoke debris and other contamination builds up on an insulator, there's a higher likelihood of those flashovers occurring. That means a higher likelihood of lower reliability because you're having more outages. And then every time there's this arc, there's this small probability that if vegetation is nearby, there could be an ignition event. Continuing with our ignition modeling related work on understanding ignition of different vegetation. There was a 5-year campaign on the solar tower at Sandia where you could take those mirrors and point them towards the top of the tower. It would ignite a tree, and there's a small video on the screen here of one of these trees igniting from the high flux being sent to it on top of the solar tower. And the goals here was to better understand how wind would cause ignition events, or wind would impact ignition of different vegetation, geometry of that vegetation, and the scale of the vegetation would impact ignition events. The next piece is focused on power system protection. This is actually a very large area of work at Sandia on protective relaying. What I mean by power system protection is on the electric grid, there are sensors that are monitoring the voltage and current just about everywhere. And what they're doing is they're looking for any abnormalities. And if there's an abnormality of some sort, they're going to quickly identify it and de-energize that section of the line. And so this is, for example, a tree comes in contact with a line. The sensors will see that, calculate it, and de-energize the line in, let's say, 100 milliseconds. So it's a very quick, and that 100 milliseconds, though, is what we're trying to even reduce further in this program space. There's a few other technologies as well, but I'll mainly focus on one specific one to talk about today, focused on AI-based protection for distribution systems. So this is where those sensors that are on the grid, we want them to sample even faster than they typically do. We send those signals to our machine learning algorithm that's been trained on past faults. So we simulate faults on the system, and from all these simulations, we're able to train our relay to be able to identify those faults quicker. So if that tree comes in contact with a line, you can identify it, and our protective relay, in this case, we've shown around 1.4 milliseconds instead of 100 milliseconds. So it's a big decrease in the amount of time that arc exists, and that by decreasing that amount of time significantly reduces the probability of an ignition event, the probability a wildfire can ignite. And so there's been a lot of interest in this work, especially with utilities and co-ops. We've done demos in New Mexico, specifically in 2 different locations. We did on the Kirkland Air Force Base, demonstrating this protective relay on a microgrid on the Air Force Base back in 2023. And right now we are currently demoing it in Roosevelt County Co-op in eastern New Mexico. And right now our protective relay sits in parallel with traditional protection methods so that we can compare the two and see how it's doing. So this is the next step in the R&D process, getting to those demonstration phases on a real system and showing that it works. We've had 1 fault in the system so far, and we're hoping to leave it there for longer and see how it performs. All right, next I'll briefly touch on this one. It's smoke modeling related. So there's some scientists at Sandia, and throughout this presentation I've also pointed at the bottom left corner. There are names of some of the scientists that focus in these areas. So they are the real experts of experts in each of these areas. And in the smoke modeling area, we're looking at the smoke plume itself and how that is moving throughout the atmosphere during large-scale wildfires, and how that would impact solar power production in regions of the country. There's also interest in this type of work for other reasons as well, such as impact to military installations and their missions as well. All right, almost to the end here is focused on visualizing uncertainty for public safety power shutoffs and evacuation events. So what this is getting at is how you display data to either the public or to a decision maker. They will make different decisions even if it's the exact same data. So the examples I'll use here, if you show someone a picture of their house and say you have a 50% chance of it burning, you need to evacuate, they'll do one decision, but if you show them a picture of their house on fire and you say the same thing, then they take different decisions. So how you visualize the data is very important. So this is a map of an evacuation map in New Mexico during the Hermit's Peak fire. When I first saw this, my mind went to red means bad for fire and red means I should evacuate. But in reality, what they were going for is ready, set, go. Green means go, as in green means you should evacuate. And so there's some confusion that can bring, and we've seen that bring confusion in the past. So these decisions, they do matter and can cause confusion if they're not done in the right way. Here is even more recent maps that I'll show on the next slide. One is back in 2024, they did change it to red means evacuate, and so red means go as an evacuate. And then, but on the left figure in 2025, they changed it back to green means evacuate, and green means go. So this is something that maybe should be looked at and continue to be looked at further in terms of standardizing this process and making sure the public fully understands what these maps mean. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. The last project that I'll discuss is focused on the recovery process after a wildfire. So this is optimizing that recovery and making sure that once you're given the green light to go in and repair a system, an electric infrastructure system, you're doing it in the most optimal way to make sure we bring back service to customers with the most need and critical services in the most optimal way. So thank you to my funding organization, DOE Caesar office, and then also all the dedicated staff that work in this program space. There are a lot of them that make this program successful. And of course I have a website, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your presentation. First questions are from Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Doctor, for your presentation. In the discussion, I'm not, if it was there, I don't think I heard it, but are there stationary batteries planned for various areas to prevent actual shutoff?
Yes. Yeah, so that is some of the work that's being done. There's also talk of putting microgrids in specific spots.
Okay.
I know, for example, there's one spot in Colorado that has done this recently where they decided that there was a community at the end of a feeder, so a long feeder that they had to turn off and de-energize due to public safety power shutoffs, and also was a high wildfire risk area. And so that community had very bad reliability metrics because they had to turn off the power significantly. So instead of investing in undergrounding that line, for example, they decided the best way to do it was to build a small microgrid or have backup generation basically at the end of that feeder to help that community make sure that they kept the lights on when there were high wildfire risk times.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so myself and Representative Ortez were the ones that got the microgrid bill done earlier this year. So you're fully able to go out and build all the microgrids to your heart is happy. That's number one. And number two, so is there already a plan of where stationary batteries could be placed? Because you could feasibly see trends of where these fires are going to come from in the future, I'm assuming, based on all your research and data that you have available. So you would know where to put these so that you don't have 911 emergency or something like that that's not reachable. Does that sound about right? Or?
Yeah. Madam Chair, Senator, thank you. So I'll say that at this time, I don't think we're doing that right now. But I think that is a possible idea and one of those investment decisions that can be made to mitigate the power outages that are impacted by wildfires.
And so, Madam Chair, you said you met with PNM yesterday?
Or last week.
Last week, excuse me, it was
Yeah.
Sunday yesterday. Well, I work every day of the year, all of us do too, so I thought it doesn't surprise me if we work on a Sunday. What did PNM have to tell you? What have the co-ops maybe told you? I see their their head guy over there in the back, so, and the other head guy next to him, and the other head, yeah,
Yeah, this is one of their highest priority areas.
okay.
And so when we work with them, we were demoing last week that PyroKit tool. And so that's still under development, but we wanted to make sure we showed them where we were at this point with that PyroKit tool. And so eventually, hopefully, we can continue to work with P&M on demonstrating that technology.
And the
continue
co-ops.
And the co-ops, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's totally, at this juncture, with what we've done legislatively here, the bill I just spoke of a little while ago, and what we know is this is totally avoidable now. We can avoid having folks not have access to emergency services and all the other stuff, and and school shutdowns and all that kind of stuff could totally be avoided now that we have a lot of this in place. So I encourage you to take a look at New Mexico law in terms of how we can help you with this and stuff. So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Next is Senator Tobiasen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there areas of New Mexico that are particularly vulnerable to wildfire and, lines being compromised in the grid?
Yes. So that is one of the areas that we've looked at. I think I showed some heat maps earlier in this talk as well. Specific parts of New Mexico that have more forested region, have distribution lines and transmission lines that are going through forested regions. Those are likely more at risk compared to an area with no vegetation around, for example.
So, Madam Chair, could you give us a couple, like maybe your top 1 or 2 regions of the state that are most vulnerable?
I'm not sure I know exactly what is most vulnerable. However, a lot of our emphasis right now has been in the Gila National Forest area, as we have seen some of the most wildfires down in that region of our state.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, is there a specific level of vegetation management that your model is assuming?
Madam Chair, Senator, thank you. No, not in these models are we assuming that would be an input that would be needed to be done from the utility that's using these models as well eventually. So hopefully they will know, and they do know when they're doing vegetation management, and they can have that be part of this model as well.
Madam Chair, thank you. That's interesting because that could be troublesome in using that model, right? Like in your programming, because it's arbitrary based on what knowledge that department or agency has and their willingness to put in timely information. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, and another important piece of this is for historical fires, if you can record as much data as possible, that can help us inform our planning for future wildfires as well. And so anytime you can collect more data, especially in the world we are now where data is a key for a lot of things, having more data from past wildfires can be very beneficial.
Okay, thank you. Right. And Madam Chair, so is there a degree of vegetation management that, from what you've seen, the data you've collected, would be ideal, especially in these very vulnerable areas?
Thank you. I am not sure on that one. I don't know exactly how much vegetation management is needed. It's very dependent on where you are in the region of the country. Yeah.
Okay. And Madam Chair, you actually mentioned, I think it was 100 milliseconds is what your system is measuring now, right, to de-energize a line?
And Madam Chair and Senator, thank you. So on the distribution system, that's somewhat of a general 100 milliseconds. It could be anywhere from around 17 milliseconds to hundreds of milliseconds. It depends on what type of fault is occurring and what type of protection system is enabled. And so that's currently how things are done.
So Madam Chair, is there still a potential with that quick of a response, which I don't even know how fast that is exactly, right? How does the human eye even determine that? Can something still catch on fire? Can a tree still catch on fire?
Madam Chair, Senator, the probabilities are very low, but it is possible. And so that is one of the reasons why we're trying to make it even faster, is so that that does not happen.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I know I asked you a lot of detailed questions there, but thank you, Madam Chair. I'm done.
Thank you, Senator. Next, Senator Bergman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I am just curious, since this is the second committee round where we've had fire research presentations. Well, the last one we had was when we were up in Lanel, and I'm just wondering if you work with fire tech and that program system.
So we've talked with Lanel in the past and a few other national labs as well. Specifically, even in 2 weeks, we are getting together with DOE customers, and 4 of our national labs are getting together specifically to talk about our wildfire programs and how we can better coordinate all those wildfire efforts across multiple national labs.
That's good to hear, because it's not exactly the same, and they were bragging about their supercomputers in Lanel that were running the models. We're like, can we just do this? He's like, yes, on our supercomputer only. But it definitely seems like you guys are doing really similar work, and if we could combine the two, it even seems like an even better tool.
Yep. Yeah. Madam Chair, Senator, thank you. Yeah, the work going on not only at national labs, but also by a lot of utilities and co-ops in this space, and then also other, U.S. Forest Service and other fire laboratories. There's a lot of this going on right now. It's really even taken off more over the last decade.
That's also good to hear. And then one other question that maybe I should know the answer to, but who makes those decisions regarding the Ready, Set, Go coloring choices?
That is a good question. I do not know. I know our expert in the human factors related decision-making work, Laura Matson, she's the one that pointed me to these maps, and I could ask her, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Hopefully I can find the answer also. Thank you, that's all.
Anyone else? Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'm just going back to page, I think it's 13, the Pyro Kit, the wildfire risk and mitigation planning tool. This looks very similar to what we'd use in the Air Force to kind of planning tools on like weapon systems using GIS and kind of that helping us predict kind of damage assessment and things like that. So is that where this is kind of, in a way, kind of built from, something similar to that?
Madam Chair, Senator, thank you. So yes, this tool, along with many tools that are GIS type based, have a similar look to it. So there's layers on the tool where you can populate the map with different layers that show either the wildfire risk, for example, or the electric infrastructure, or pre-mitigation strategy and post-mitigation strategy, what the difference in your wildfire risk may be, things along those lines, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the response. And so on the next slide, you talk about these other tools. So are these tools kind of used together? And the second question I would ask is, this Pyro Kit, how you had on slide 13, was that developed here? Is it specific to our region? And the reason why I'm asking that question is just making sure that we're really using a tool that really kind of represents the Southwest New Mexico and kind of the environment and what we're dealing with. So I just want to understand that a little bit.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator, thank you. So the Pyro Kit tool right now, we envision to be able to use it throughout the U.S. Right now, our demonstrations are focused in the New Mexico area. And so that's where we've started working with this tool. The other tools listed on the next map are also, they each have their own specific piece to it. For example, Flam Map is very good at wildfire spread modeling. Technosylvia, that's a company that sells a tool that is looking at this for, I believe, to insurance and other companies as well, along with marketing it to large-scale utilities. The U.S. Forest Service has vegetation modeling tools as well that are useful for this. And then other national labs have different risk-related tools. Some of them are not focused on wildfire specifically, but there are a lot of different tools out there, and that's part of the reason we need to keep on working together as multiple national labs and keep coordinating our efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the response. And the last question I would ask is, you know, it sounds like this really just assess the risk, current conditions of what's happening. Is there anything being done with this information as far as working with the state, working with the insurance companies to kind of, I guess, predict some of this, but also to help us maybe mitigate what is happening now to avoid what we're seeing could happen in these tools?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator, thank you. So a big part of the program goal is to help with decision-making to help with future wildfires and prevent those future wildfires from either happening or mitigating the consequence of those. We have not engaged with insurance at this point in any way, and so that is a very interesting topic area, though.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the responses. Thank you.
All right, I think that's all the questions. Thank you for your presentation. Very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, our next presentation is the Federal Affordable Connectivity Program for Broadband, Prospects of Upcoming Years and Needed State Response. Jeff Lopez, the Director of Office of Broadband Access and Expansion. The new Director, Judd Hinkle, Chief Executive Officer of Smith Bagley, and Guy Turkley, Chief Operating Officer of Smith Bagley. Whenever you're ready, gentlemen. All right, whenever you're ready, gentlemen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. I am Jeff Lopez, the newly appointed Director of the New Mexico Office of Broadband Access and Expansion. I'll be presenting first, unless you'd like to do a quick round of introductions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and the committee. Judd Hinkle, CEO of SBI. You may know us by our commercial brand, which is Cellular One of Northeast Arizona. Most people just call us C1.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, committee members, my name is Guy Turley. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Smith Bagley Incorporated, SBI, operating as Cellular One. Pleasure to be here.
If I may, Madam Chair. So I have been on the job for 9 weeks. Before that, I was working for Senator Ben Ray Lujan in his Albuquerque office and for a total of 13 years in Washington, D.C., where I was previously the advisor on the Subcommittee on Telecommunications. So both in my current position as the Director of Office of Broadband and my past experience working on some of the broadband affordability programs at the federal level, I'm here to provide some background on broadband affordability. You should all have my presentation. And turning to slide 3, I just want to provide a history of affordable communications. And this is going back over 100 years to the creation of the Bell monopoly, where one single company largely provided telecommunications services around the country. With that monopoly, they were able to subsidize service for low-income individuals. With the 1934 Communications Act, it established the Federal Communications Commission and required affordable prices as part of the federal statute. 1984 created the divestment of AT&T, breaking up the Ma Bell into a number of regional companies that made some of that affordable subsidy very difficult to administer. And that led right into 1996 with the Federal Telecommunications Act. I will get into details on what this meant for communications affordability at the time, but it created a system where you could have competitive carriers and still have some of those subsidies for affordability in addition to high cost, in addition to supporting schools and libraries. It was a comprehensive system taking into account the breakup of a monopoly, creating more competition, and leading to innovation in space at the same time as supporting affordability. The next timeline is for 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic. In response to the lack of connectivity and what it meant for access to education, access to healthcare, access to workforce development, Congress establishes the emergency broadband benefit. This was a $50 per month subsidy directly to telecommunications providers on the priority of the household. So it was up to the household to decide how that broadband benefit was spent, whether it was with one provider or another, whoever provided either mobile or fixed service. A year later, with the Affordable Connectivity Program, Congress passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law. Part of that made the emergency broadband benefit permanent at a $30 per month rate. That was in combination with the pre-existing Lifeline program under the Telecommunications Act, which I will get into further. Moving to slide 4, this is how affordability subsidies functioned under a monopoly, where one single provider can use the long-distance rates to support local rates, can use business rates to support residential rates, and use higher rates for urban populations to support rural rates in rural areas for households and businesses that otherwise could not afford communication services. Again, this changed under the 1996 Telecommunications Act, where contributions were collected and are collected today from telecommunications providers around the country. At the federal level, this is a fee on telecommunications services overall, and it's at historic highs where 40% is assessed in a fee from your phone bill, whether it is long-distance services if you still have a landline to your home or the cell phone in your pocket. Some portion of that is collected at the federal level under the jurisdiction of the Federal Communications Commission, using an administrative company to administer the program. Again, the 1996 Telecommunications Act also authorized states to collect contributions and distribute subsidies, which we do have in New Mexico today, supporting affordability. So again, starting with the federal, this is a contribution factor on telecom services on slide number 6. This supports affordability in addition to 3 other programs: high cost, which is building broadband in largely rural areas; the E-rate program for schools and libraries, which subsidize rates for our critical education institutions; rural healthcare, which subsidizes rates for our rural healthcare clinics; and Lifeline, which is today available for low-income households at 135% of the federal poverty level at an amount of $9.25 per month. So this is available to households today through the Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Universal Service Fund program. Moving to our state-administered Rural Universal Service Fund, again, this is assessed on your telephone bills today, where it's a per-connection charge on telecommunications connections. This is about $1.60 per month on your cell phone bill or your landline that goes towards the State Universal Service Fund. It supports 3 different priorities: the access reduction support, comparable carrier support, and broadband at $10 million per year. This changed recently in the last legislative session, increasing the overall budget for this fund from $30 million per year to $40 million per year. So the federal program supports affordability. Currently, the state program does not. Moving to slide number 8, I want to cover the Affordable Connectivity Program, which I discussed in the timeline. Again, this was passed in 2021 as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and Congress appropriated $14.2 billion overall. This is a bipartisan commitment and part of the broadband programs that included what I now administer under the Office of Broadband, the BEAD program, in addition to other priorities, including the Digital Equity Act. So this was a comprehensive bill that included high cost, it included digital literacy, and it included affordability with the Affordable Connectivity Program. Again, the subsidized monthly broadband service at $30 per household or $75 per household on tribal lands, and that is per month. It also included a one-time $100 subsidy on connected devices. Eligibility was restricted to households below 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. So this was above what Lifeline had established at 135%, at 200% of FPG. The funds expired in April of last year. So where this provided an important component of the overall broadband picture in New Mexico and across the country Congress allowed the program to lapse in April of 2024, not providing additional appropriations for this critical program that supported our low-income households in New Mexico. Turning to slide number 9, this is what the ACP program looked like in the last month of funding in April of 2024. 184,131 households participated in ACP when funding lapsed. This is a participation rate of 42.7%. Approximately 431,000 households were eligible. This was a very popular program in New Mexico and across the country, where households below 200% of the federal poverty guidelines received direct support on their internet bill, whether it was mobile service or fixed broadband. The subscribers by service type is the pie chart on the right. 43% of households chose to fund their fixed broadband connections. This is fiber, this is your cable connection if it uses broadband, and another 56% of households chose to fund their mobile connection. So this gave the power to the household to decide their priorities when it came to mobile or fixed broadband connectivity. The monthly cost in the last month was $5.6 million directly to New Mexico. Annualized, that's approximately $67 million per year. Turning to slide number 10. This is what we have in a post-affordable connectivity program world in New Mexico. We still have the Lifeline program, which was established under that 1996 Telecommunications Act at the federal level. This is $9.25 per month, up to $25 on tribal lands, and eligibility is a lower threshold of 135% of federal poverty guidelines. Today, approximately 56,000 households participate in the Lifeline program out of a total of 334,000 eligible. That's a participation rate of about 17%. The costs in New Mexico, again, this is federal funds, not state funding, is approximately $10.6 million per year. There are also private programs administered directly by internet service providers that vary from provider to provider. I won't talk about any specific ones. But again, this gets to one of the first issues I brought up in this presentation, which is monopoly. If a service provider has a monopoly in a certain area, they're able to subsidize rates because they don't fear a competitor coming in and undercutting that rate or taking some of their high revenue customers, taking away their ability to provide a subsidy for low-income households. The Lifeline program is nationwide and helps alleviate that problem because you collect from every single eligible telecommunications carrier and provide that to low-income households directly. The Affordable Connectivity Program was similar, where it is across the board, gave it to the household to decide how that money was spent. That was just an appropriated fund, which we've now seen has some risk involved if it's just from general funding every year and not part of a system of support like the Universal Service Fund. Turning to the last slide, this touches on other programs. I will be back here in October to present on the Office of Broadband in general, but I want to say affordability was an important part of our broadband picture in New Mexico before the Affordable Connectivity Program lapsed. The BEAD program, which we are expecting to put into public comment this week, really would have benefited from the continuation of the Affordable Connectivity Program because it provides a guaranteed rate of return for companies that provide service to low-income households. So instead of us just funding the capital investment, it provides sustainability for the businesses involved in the BEAD program, where they can expect some return where they are serving low-income households. And in the case of ACP, it was $30 per month and $75 per month on tribal areas. So the infrastructure part, we are hard at work. We are expecting to sign enforceable commitments with internet service providers by the end of next year that will provide service to every single unserved and underserved household in New Mexico. So I think the picture for infrastructure is very strong. The picture for operations support, making sure the networks that we're funding with the capital investment also has the operations investment, is a little less certain. Affordability now, post-ACP, is very uncertain. We do have the Lifeline program, but it is undersubscribed. There are a lot of households that are eligible that aren't participating in the program. Part of that is due to the low subsidy rate of $9.25 per month. And the last part I just want to mention today is digital literacy. The Digital Equity Act also passed with the bipartisan infrastructure law. That grant program was canceled by the current federal administration this year. So we do not have direct funding in New Mexico for digital literacy or digital opportunity. but that also makes sure that the networks that we're building are supported, that the households that are participating in these programs understand the benefits to healthcare, understand the benefits to education, and understand the benefits to workforce development. So I'm just here talking about affordable connectivity today. Again, I will be back here in October to talk about the Office of Broadband in general and provide more details on our BEAD funding and capital programs. And with that, I will turn to the other panelists.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. If I may go ahead and continue off of that. I also had an overview on here, but he eloquently did it right there, and I don't want to go and repeat everything, but I'll go over some of the topics here, which, as we know, the Affordable Connectivity Program has lapsed. And I'm a member of 2 associations in Washington, D.C., and there is no belief that USF reform is going to happen this year or happen next year. With that being the case, there's no help on its way to help ACP. So they're looking to the states to take that on. We are proposing that there could be a program here of broadband support, and we have a mechanism as well at the end of this presentation of how it could be done. One of the things I would say is there's already a program, the Low-Income Telephone Assistance Program in New Mexico. And as we said earlier, it gives $3.50. It already has a mechanic that works. Its administration of it flows very easily, and it also leans on federal support and the documents they use to process it, which puts a lot less burden on the state of New Mexico. I'll go through that mechanic at the end of the presentation here, but before that, my colleague here would like to go a little bit over who we are and what we do, and then I'll go into a little bit of detail about the ACP plan and what it did and what the lapse has caused that Director Lopez has not gone over yet. So on slide 4.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, committee members, thank you. Just a brief overview of Smith Bagley Incorporated. For over 30 years, we've been providing mobile, voice, and internet services in the Four Corners region. In 2000, our founder, Mr. Smith Bagley, was very instrumental in convincing the FCC to increase the monthly Lifeline subsidy to tribal lands, adding a $25 subsidy on top of that. That addressed the affordability portion that Director Lopez mentioned. That program, as has been pointed out with the FCC, under the direction of the FCC, is administered by USAC, the Universal Service Administration Corporation. These benefits, of course, are very instrumental, especially the $25 increase that was brought about in the year 2000, very instrumental to tribal members nationwide, and especially here in New Mexico. In cooperation with these funding programs, there is a qualified status called eligible telecommunication carrier that any of us that want to have access to these funding programs and use them on the benefit of the customers that we have or through the other programs that are there for infrastructure and so forth, have to go through a qualifying process. We become ETC, qualified carriers. In 2001, we reached that. We've also had that qualification in Arizona and New Mexico, in Utah. This, of course, brings the ability for us to take these subsidies through the programs and directly to the customer. There's a number of programs that at the federal level and at the state level, some have been mentioned, that come through these programs, High Cost and Lifeline in particular at the federal level. Within the state of New Mexico, there's a broadband program that is administered by the PRC, and then, of course, Lifeline qualification here as well. Through over the past several decades, with these programs and the funds that come through them, Smith Bagley has been able to invest more than $51 million in building out infrastructure and providing affordable services to our customers in New Mexico. I'm going to now move to slide 5. Our service area focuses in the northwestern quadrant of New Mexico. In that quadrant, we have over 23,000 customers in 19,000 households. As you can see, the vast majority, 84%, are tribal members. Our network consists of 76 cell towers, connected primarily through microwave network that ties it into fiber optic wherever that's available. The cell towers and the microwave have allowed us in a very economical way to extend our reach and provide coverage into some of the most remote and sparsely populated areas of the state. And in many cases, we've been the first telecommunications that have been available to the residents in those areas, as well as providing mobile access and mobile broadband for those driving through and enjoying the beautiful scenery of the state. We have 23 employees that manage our stores, the brick and mortar stores, as well as maintaining our network operations. In the ETC status that was mentioned, as I said, we go through a qualifying process. That opens us up to audits to make sure that the funds that we are accessing are used efficiently and effectively and without fraud. And over the past 25 years, we have been able to go through many audits with no significant findings of noncompliance. That's through a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication by individuals, and systems in place to make sure that the proper flow of funds is making it to the right people. With that record, that track record of no findings of noncompliance, it has put us in a place where we are able to advocate at the federal level for good governance on universal service reform or other programs that can bring those affordability benefits to the consumer. As has been mentioned, there's a variety of programs, especially some that came about through the pandemic. And one of the things that we like to highlight, hopefully that pandemic is long in our rearview mirror, but it's important to understand the benefits that came and how quickly the carriers were able to respond to that. With our mobile broadband network that we provide, we were able to respond within months to primarily the schools in our service area that were now having students at home and having, or teachers, students and teachers having to be at home. And we were able to place over 10,000 mobile hotspot devices in the education industry to allow learning to continue on as smoothly as it possibly could. That mobile aspect was very critical as the feedback that we got, because one day a student may be at home, but the next day they may have to be at their grandparents or at some other family member's place. And perhaps they needed to use it for work or in another situation. The Affordable Connectivity Plan program that we're talking about here was extremely instrumental in providing additional bandwidth, additional data volume for these uses at home, going from where we were at about 5 gigabits per month to 105 gigabits per month, and allowed our customers to use this data in whatever way they needed to, whether it be for schooling or for healthcare or for work, and allow them to take it where they needed it. And so it was very important that they had the mobile access to this broadband.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Slide 7. So to feed off of what we were talking about earlier, it was the ACP program was founded under the bipartisan infrastructure law. One of the things that we missed earlier was it was allocated at $30 for non-tribal, but $75 tribals, because it's much more difficult to operate and maintain the network on tribal lands. As we talk about what was given to the household so they could afford broadband, I'd also like to talk about the economic benefits this created. The Brattle Group stated that there was 12 million additional telehealth visits, and the money saved through that is 4 times what the cost of the entire program was. So they reap a lot of cost savings and a lot of benefits. I can tell you personally, I see my GP once a year now. I have an app that's provided through our health service, through our work, and if I have a question, I go on that app, I go to a registered nurse, and I can get whatever medicine I need. I am not charged for that. Every one of our employees also has that. So I personally can tell you what a change it can make by having connectivity. Also, if you look at ACP participation, it resulted in 2.1 to 4.3 billion in annual wage gains. And lastly, I'd like to say in the Benton Institute, it found that for $1 in ACP subsidy resulted in $2 of economic benefit. I think those numbers are astounding. If we move on to slide 8, when the federal government program ended, the intermittent broadband use, it became rampant. I can tell you right now that our customers, 85% since they lost that data, do not use over 5 gigabits. They cannot afford to spend the money to get over 5 gigabits. Where when ACP was here, we were able to give an extra 100 gigabits of 4G data. But we didn't stop at that. We went ahead and allowed unlimited after that on 3G so they could stay connected through Facebook and talk to family members, especially beneficial to those tribal members that have family in the military. And this was very critical for them during that time. We were only able to do this because we had the extra subsidy coming in so we could offer the extra data and to expand our network. At our peak, we had 13,000 customers on the ACP program. At that time, the average usage of those customers was over 20 gigabits each. On to slide 9. This is a breakdown of the counties in New Mexico. As you can see, there was heavy penetrations in the areas we serve, which are very rural. If you look at McKinley and if you look at San Juan, those are our coverage areas, and 88% and 51%. But also in the cities, you can see the penetration may not have been as high, but the take rate exceeded ours. And that obviously would happen because it's larger populations. But New Mexico and New Mexicans saw this program, and they very much took advantage of it when it existed. I think it's believed by all now that broadband is no longer just a like-to-have service, a nice-to-have service, or a service for those that have the means. I think we can all agree that it is a basic service. I think it helps close the digital divide, and in mobile households especially. As my colleague, Mr. Turley, said earlier, if you talk to anybody in our area and say, would you like connectivity at your home with a fiber link, or would you rather have it mobile, whether that be on a hotspot, or we can actually load the data to your phone and open it as a hotspot, every one of them says, I'd rather be mobile with this and take it around wherever I go. So we find it critical that mobile broadband plays a role in the future of ACP. Moving on to slide 12 now. Here's a recommendation of a mechanic of how New Mexico could continue with an ACP program. Our recommendation would be to authorize for 5 years or until the federal ACP program is reintroduced. As I said, nobody believes USF reform is going to happen this year or next year, but if it does, the program in New Mexico could be reevaluated if they come back with a program that has $30 or $75 again. We also recommend that only ETCs be able to participate. This is because they have already been vetted by the PRC as operators who can pass audits and move on with that. I'd also say that any provider in New Mexico can become an ETC. As a matter of fact, TracFone is in the process of becoming an ETC right now. Our recommendation as well is that the program should cost about $15 to $25. $15 for non-tribal and $25 for tribal. If all eligible Lifeline customers signed up for that today, that'd be around 50,000 customers, or around $12 million. We say Lifeline customers because this mechanic already exists to qualify these customers to come through. They're qualified at the federal level, and right now they claim to $3.50 in New Mexico. As I said earlier, you take the report that you filed at the federal level, you then process it through Vantage Point at the New Mexico level, and they can distribute the funds. All that would need to happen is to adjust those amount of funds that are distributed back, and that would allow carriers like us to give livable broadband. I define livable broadband as around 20 gigabits. It's very hard to do what you need to do on your daily basis at 5 gigabits. Now, if many of you pulled out your cell phone right now, you look at your last month's usage, and maybe it's about 2 gigabits. That's because we're jumping on Wi-Fi every chance we get. I know you can jump on Wi-Fi in here today. They don't have that opportunity to jump on Wi-Fi everywhere out there. The way we could fund this is we believe there's going to be headroom in the state USF fund of the $40 million that's allocated. We believe the $12 million could fit within this fund and it could be implemented. And that's the recommendation we're making today of how New Mexico could continue to provide broadband support to those that need it most. Thank you. We're all available to take questions now.
Thank you for your presentation. First will be Senator Souls.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Trying to figure out where I ought to start with this. The affordability of $30 that we've had, what percent of the total cost does that cover? Because just talking about that piece, if it's of $300, that's not much. If it's of $40, that's a whole lot. What is the percent?
If I may, Madam Chair, Senators, Representatives, it depends on the service that the household choose to subsidize. So the federal level of $30 per month was almost a shot in the dark during the recovery from the pandemic. It does not reflect everybody's connectivity everywhere. The Congress also elected to provide $75 per month on tribal areas. Again, understanding that the cost to provide broadband in tribal areas is higher. It depends on what service the low-income household is subscribing to, but again, it gives the power to the consumer to decide where to apply that. So it varies on plan to plan. Let
me kind of direct the question over here is, you talked about a typical or livable amount. What does that cover of that?
Madam Chair, Senator, at $75 subsidy, we gave them unlimited data. We gave them 105 gigabits at 4G, and then we gave them unlimited 3G after that. It covered their entire phone bill. They did not have to come out of pocket.
Okay, Madam Chair, and for people who are not on the tribal subsidy, it's covering 50% or so, 40%?
On those, we did an alternate plan, but it covered their entire phone bill of the plan they chose. If they chose the lower plan, it would cover it completely, yes. If they chose a higher plan, they may have to pay a little bit. Almost every one of our customers took the plan that would cover it completely because it was higher than 20 gigabits, and most didn't use more than that.
Okay, Madam Chair, so the affordability, this essentially covered the total amount for basic needs that a family might have. Is that what you're telling me?
For our customer. I cannot speak to the fiber lines out there. I cannot speak to the other carriers. For our customer, because we not only felt that we should do it as an obligation and to help us expand our network, we thought we had an obligation to consumer to do the best we could for them through COVID.
Thank you. And so, Madam Chair, and I remember a couple of years ago, we had some things like this, that we had the map of the various carriers around the state, and rates went from, and I don't know what unit they were talking about, but like $12 to $2, depending on where you lived for connectivity, and that might have been Wi-Fi. What is the variability around the state for what the costs are? The statewide program is for everybody, not just the Northeast that these gentlemen are covering. What's the variability?
I can vary very broadly. If you are in urban Albuquerque with a lot of options for providers, whether it is a cable provider or a fiber provider or fixed wireless, you can get a lower rate because there's competition. So you can see rates for basic broadband service anywhere from $15 per month if you are a low-income subscriber to some telecom providers in Albuquerque. And if you're providing a gigabit per download, it can be much higher. So again, it varies depending on choice, but I think compared to rural areas, which often only have one or two providers, they can see costs much higher. Low Earth orbit satellite usually charges about $130 per month for their basic tier of service. And some of the rural providers have similar competitive rates depending on where you are and how much it was to connect that household.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, as I recall from looking at that chart in the past, it didn't make sense. There were some urban areas that had very high rates, some rural areas had very low rates, and it kind of seemed to depend on whoever in government or others had negotiated the prices. But if we have just a universal $30 thing, that doesn't make sense when it's all over the place as to what the actual costs could be. Who sets the actual costs, Madam Chair? Is that the company sets it, and then there's the rate? I mean, is there any oversight of that? And I'm thinking somewhat in electric utilities, they have to go for a rate case before the PRC if they're going to change things as a regulated monopoly. Does this fall under the same type of a mechanism?
Madam Chair, Senator, there are minimum standards that are set when it comes to the Lifeline program that you have to supply with the subsidy you receive. And so on a mobile broadband, you have to supply at least 4.5 gigabits and be at least at 3G. And I believe on the fiber side, you have to provide 1.28 terabits. And I think it's 25 down. It is 25 down and 3 up is the minimum standards. As for the data that somebody wants to purchase after those minimum thresholds or whether more is offered, that's up to the individual company. As you heard during COVID, we offered much more data than any of our other mobile broadband providers.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, part of the reason I ask is people in rural areas, there isn't competition. There is a carrier, and they're somewhat at the mercy of whatever that carrier chooses to provide, and it looks like the subsidy is pretty standard regardless of what they may be providing. And so that's kind of where some of those questions come from. Has there been an inflation adjustment? I mean, we were talking about in 2020 when it came, when these prices were set, there's been, everybody talks about there's been a lot of inflation. How do we adjust for inflation from eating up that subsidy cost?
Yeah, Director Lopez will take the second part of this, but Madam Chair and Senator, there has not been an adjustment in the Lifeline subsidy in 25 years. That's one of the problems, is there's been no inflation adjustment, yet networks keep getting more and more expensive to run, especially coming out of COVID and now. The costs have gone through the roof. So as for, what is supplied by the federal government has been adjusted in 25 years.
And Madam Chair, Senator, if I may answer your previous question as well, there is no rate regulation on broadband nationwide, and there is, to my knowledge, no rate regulation on broadband within New Mexico. There's been strong opposition from providers to have that stick on the regulation side, mandating the prices that broadband providers can charge in the state. The Affordable Connectivity Program was a carrot, providing a blanket subsidy regardless of service cost, as you raised, but providing an incentive to serve low-income households where there wasn't an incentive before. The question on whether to tie the Affordable Connectivity Program to increases every year has definitely been proposed, but it was not part of the initial program. So it was just set at $30 per month permanently, which I think also contributed to some of the concerns with that program, that it didn't meet the costs.
Madam Chair, and thank you, and I think those are kind of some of my concerns is where there's competition and multiple choices for consumers, there's some consumer down pressure on rates. Where there's only one, there's nothing that keeps companies other than their own public goodwill, I guess, to keep rates affordable. And when the subsidy is set and not changing due to inflation or other things, that can cause for some greed, gouging, other types of things. And I appreciate you indicating the feds, haven't changed things. Not likely with current administration that we're going to get a lot coming out of them for a couple of years anyway. And so certainly I think incumbent upon the state to ensure that there's connectivity for people. By the way, just a little personal thing. I drive from Las Cruces up here all the time. I can tell you right where the 3 dead spots are along the way. It's very frustrating in a state that has been working on all this issue for so long that along one of our major interstates that it drops calls, and I have to apologize to people all the time for that. I guess my last question on the state, on page 10, and you talked about the uptake on these affordability, at only 17% of the people who were eligible were taking part in that. How come? Is that a public outreach, them not knowing about it, them not wanting it? Why such a low uptake when it sounds like, at least with your group in the Northeast or Northwest, that it covers essentially the whole cost? That I would think people would do that if they knew about it. Where are we failing on the outreach? And those are my questions, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, Senator, I think the participation rate in the Affordable Connectivity Program was above 40%. So it was much higher participation rate when it was $30 per month. The low 17% participation rate in the Lifeline program, I think, is due to the subsidy. It's $9.25 per month. That is probably not meeting the needs to connect these households when it comes to providing broadband.
So Madam Chair, it's almost like the administration problem of filling out the forms and turning them in isn't worth the $9 a month and people just aren't bothering. Is that what the concern?
Madam Chair, Senator, that is my concern with the $9.25.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you, Senator. Next is Representative Garrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. 2 questions. Director Lopez, What is the current prognosis on E-rate? Because that has been completely beneficial to our state.
Yes, Madam Chair, Representative, it is in a strong position. After the Supreme Court decided that the Universal Service Fund was constitutional at the federal level, E-rate does continue to be supported by the Federal Communications Commission through USAC. So the state of New Mexico will continue to see some of those benefits from federal dollars to our schools and libraries. I will say the contribution methodology for the federal E-rate program is putting strain, where it's a 40% fee on telecommunication services. That is not sustainable, and it provides a very high cost for some of the telecommunications carriers nationwide and in New Mexico.
Thank you, and Smith Bagley, thank you also for being here. How you mentioned that you primarily work in northwestern New Mexico, nothing in southern New Mexico, and I'm speaking because Highway 9 desperately needs it.
You want to take it technically?
Madam Chair, Representative Garrett. Yes, we only operate currently in the northwestern quadrant. There's historical reasons for that. As a cellular provider, you have to have spectrum licenses acquired from the FCC through open auction or others. And we have focused that effort in the northwestern quadrant as a way to expand our network out a little more organically. It's quite a reach and very costly to look at going to another quadrant of the state, acquiring the licenses and setting up a network when there are other providers already there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Next is Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director. Congratulations on your new role. Thank you for reaching out right away to speak to many of us. And, this is the swim lane that I spend an awful lot of time in. So I appreciate all the work you're doing and jumping headfirst into it. I think we're in good hands, so thank you. And to Smith Bagley, thank you for the heads up, on a lot of what you have outlined here. I think this is very important. Immediately, Madam Chair, and I'm sure you were too, just tackled in the hallway over, the funds and the program ending and not having a plan in place for it. I mean, it's difficult to do that, to have a plan in place, not knowing, what the right hand, the left hand are going to be doing with each other, or if they're not going to talk to each other. I'm looking at page 12 here, and the program outline and the funding options and all of that. And I think this is very admirable that you've come forward with a plan rather than asking us to do it. And I always like, leadership like that to show up and say, here's what's really needed. I am, let me just start with, are there telecom carriers in New Mexico that don't offer broadband now? Because I know some of the electric cooperatives are offering broadband now. So are there the telecoms that don't?
Yes, there are some legacy carriers that do not offer broadband, or at least not what the Office of Broadband would define with 100 megabits per second download and 25 megabits per second upload.
So then obviously what you're saying here, or you're proposing here, is that only the companies that would have broadband offering would be eligible for this funding, because you wouldn't participate in the program otherwise. I mean, you'd have to have a broadband option in your tool of services and products, right?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator, this is a broadband program. It would be a broadband offering. It's not like Lifeline where you can still get the subsidy if you provide 1,000 minutes.
Okay.
And nobody really files that anyway. Everybody files based on the data usage. That's why you have to hit the 4.5 gigabit threshold.
So essentially all of the rural telecom carriers would, if they offer broadband, would be eligible for this program fund.
Madam Chair, Senator, the way we've designed it, yes, absolutely. And especially those that are ETC carriers, because they've already been vetted by the PRC, and that's why we think it's very good to go down that route.
And what about the rural electric cooperatives that offer broadband? Would they be eligible for this?
Madam Chair, Senator, it depends on the structure of the program. So I believe that the PRC has the jurisdiction today to establish this program. If it was through legislation, then that would be decided obviously by the members of the committee and others. So it depends on the structure of the program and who would be eligible. But ETCs right now are not typically defined by the rural electric co-ops.
Well, I just, from my perspective, and I spend an awful lot of time on this, I would like to see anybody that offers broadband be eligible for this, Madam Chair, because I think it's just only fair and it's only right that they offer that service in their community. They should be eligible for it. So with all that being said, I would like to talk about the figures and how did you arrive at these particular figures? What sort of economic analysis did you do to come up with the 15 and the 25?
Yeah, the 15 and 25, we feel gets you to where the average standard is in the United States of America. We felt with those subsidies, sorry, Madam Chair, Senator, we felt with that subsidy level, we can provide the 20 gigabits that are needed out there and then drop it back down to unlimited 3G. I will not be able to speak for my peers in competition because I doubt they'll do that, I'll be honest with you. But we feel that we can do it at that level. Of course, if the funds went up, we feel we can offer even more.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little concerned at at the 15 and the 25, considering what it was previously. I think it was, 30 and 75 before? Is that about right? Yeah. So how did you come up with these numbers then? I know you just said because you wanted to meet the...
Madam Chair and Senator, at the 30 and 75, we were able to give unlimited. What we also took in consideration is what we thought the headroom would be within the program itself of state USF. So we thought there'd probably be about approximately 12 million, maybe more, maybe less. The director would have to speak to that. So we looked at those numbers, what could we offer, and that's how we got to those numbers. That it's something fair and equitable we could offer. It gets you to livable broadband standard of around 20 gigabits, and it could probably fit within the budget.
Madam Chair, Senator, if I may add a disclaimer, the Office of Broadband is not coming to the table with a recommendation today. We are happy to provide that if requested. My role is just to provide some of the background on affordability. So I did not take part in the estimation for the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director, because that was going to be actually one of my next questions, is where are you in this whole thing? Or are you prepared to talk about whether you can endorse a plan like this, or are you not wanting to do that at this time?
I certainly endorse, sorry, Madam Chair, Senator, I endorse a state affordability program. I think it is critical for the broadband and connectivity needs for New Mexican families across the state to have an affordability component for our broadband programs.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I really am. So Madam Chair, I would like to ask this group to get more people around the coffee table with you, around the conference table, to put something like this together to make sure everybody can support it. As you know, I carry and sponsor a lot of this legislation all the way back to 17 when we got those 3 really huge bills done, and it was a painful exercise for me personally, I have to tell you. But I don't like to go into a session or go into like to make a change like this without much more involvement. Including you have a whole association that's here today. You have you have the large carriers, you have the internet companies, you have a number of folks that could help you put this together. And I would like for you to, Madam Chair, in order for me to begin to support something like this, or to maybe even help you carry the legislation, is to see a little more work and take a pencil to these figures. I'm not quite sure if they're where they need to be. I would like it to be, maybe it's not 30 and 75, but maybe it's something between what you have and that, to get the speeds to where they really absolutely need to be. And I also just want to underscore that I don't want to see a single bit of square inch of New Mexico left out of this at all, period. So, yeah. Well, except Doñana County. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I know. Well, no, but I mean, it's going to affect other parts of the state beyond, the Smith-Bagley coverage area or whatever. But I just love the fact that you came forward and you said, hey, we recognize there's a problem here in New Mexico. We need to do something about this. So, Madam Chair, with your permission, maybe we could invite a larger group of people working together to come back again before the year ends for your committee.
Maybe. It's going to be tough. We have a pretty full schedule already, but we'll try.
Yeah, I'd sure like to see it because we've had this introductory conversation, and then I think you'd get a lot more support if we could see it again and understand what it really needs to be. I'm happy to participate in those conversations, as I've done actively every single year. I've worked with you guys all the time, and then I think the director should be a part of this as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Next is Senator Bergman's.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question, which I probably could have also Googled, but maybe it would have been accurate. How many ETCs or eligible ETCs are there in New Mexico?
Madam Chair, Senator, we can get you that information. I don't know the figure on the top of my head.
Okay, that's all then.
And I just have one question. Why was it dropped initially in 2024? What happened? Or was it, why?
Madam Chair, that's an excellent question. And I will say I am answering as the director of the Office of Broadband, but in my previous role, I was the lead negotiator for Senator Lujan on the Universal Service Fund Working Group. It was an election year, and it was very difficult to move legislation in 2024. I think that was a major factor. There were many proposals, all of them bipartisan, to continue the Affordable Connectivity Program. We had support from liberal organizations and conservative organizations to provide additional direct appropriations, but unfortunately it just wasn't in the cards for the previous Congress.
More questions? Nope. Well, thank you for your presentation. It was great. Thank you for the insight. Appreciate it. And nice meeting you. All right, we are now at public comment. We're going to start with online with Camilla Feibelman. Feibelman?
Great.
Camilla?
Thank you. Can you actually hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Camilla Feibelman. I'm the director of the Sierra Club's Rio Grande chapter, representing over 35,000 members and supporters. And I just wanted to take a minute to thank you guys for your service, even over the summer and with all of your other obligations. Taking the time to cover big issues like the one just before us. I mean, in some ways, with the threats to public communication, having solid broadband to facilitate people's communication seems more important than ever. But especially with regard to the last topic of wildfire electric grid security. And I just wanted to take note of the pictures on the front page of that presentation, the extreme wildfires, more frequent and fierce hurricanes, extreme winds, and just really take the time to name the impact of the climate crisis on New Mexico right now and the profound impact of the screeching halt of federal action on the climate. Last week, the EPA took public comment on what's called the endangerment finding, which is the ruling that the EPA found that greenhouse gases are indeed a threat to public health and the environment, and then they should be building regulations on the reduction of greenhouse gases. But the Trump's EPA has basically said we won't be taking further action on protecting our climate. And so the cost to New Mexico and the country really will be even greater. So having your attention to these huge and costly climate disasters and impacts, even just to our grid, are very important. The week before that, there was public hearings on the Rancho Viejo AES solar and battery storage proposal, and that was just a conditional use permit of solar and battery storage near an electric load that, in the case of an impact to the larger grid, could keep Santa Fe running in an extreme emergency. So I guess it all comes back to the science, technology, and telecommunications that you each have at the center of your mission in this interim, and our hope to see continued and comprehensive climate action at the legislature, even in a 30-day. So thank you so much for the time and attention.
Thank you, Camilla. Next will be Charles Goodmacher.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm Charles Goodmacher, speaking on behalf of Healthy Climate New Mexico. We'd also like to echo the call that Camilla from the Sierra Club just made for support for comprehensive climate legislation in the next session. But specifically, I'm here to share with you a completely different idea. It's related to comprehensive climate legislation, but different. Just recently, August 14th, our New Mexico Environment Department released the results of a study where they found it was a first-of-a-kind blood testing study of people in the Clovis area, where they found that 99.7% participants living in or working near the Air Force Base had one or more per and the PFAS substances or forever chemicals in their blood. They released the results. It was a $1.2 million blood testing project funded by NMED with 628 people. So this is very alarming that the rates were so high. It's very alarming because we all know PFAS are a major health threat to all. And Healthy Climate New Mexico thanks the NMED and DOH for conducting those tests. Now, PFAS are also widely used in fracking operations in oil and gas wells throughout the state. With ongoing debate over setbacks for oil and gas wells near sensitive areas, the sensitive areas defined as being places where our more vulnerable populations live, thinking of students, seniors, and so on. That with that debate happening, perhaps it's time that the state consider also testing for PFAS and other major contaminants in the blood of people living in or near wells. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goodmucker. All right, our last presentation. Before I do that, I want to say Marco Gonzalez gave us lunch today. It was wonderful, so thank you, Marcos, for our lunch today. All right, our last presentation is Cybersecurity Office Status Update. Raja, whenever you are ready. Whenever you're ready. All right, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Rajesh Simbenam. I oversee cybersecurity governance and its implementation for the state of New Mexico. So based on some feedback that we received from other policymakers, we put together an agenda. So if you go to page number 2, you will see that we are planning to be in front of the STTC in August, September, and October. And we wanted to take that time and split it in 3 different segments to indicate what we want to achieve in those time slots. First and foremost, we want to start with activities and achievements. And in September, we want to do the FY26 plans and beyond. And then in October, as we get closer to the legislative session, we want to talk about funding and any legislative changes. So we are taking a methodical or a programmatic approach to, how to go about and address this for the larger agenda items. So today, however, what we wanted to talk about is what is cybersecurity, get it to the granular level of what it involves, what is the mission and vision of the Office of Cybersecurity, what we are doing in water and wastewater cybersecurity efforts, and state and local cybersecurity grant, the federal grant that we received, and any other significant events. We have a lot to cover, and before we get into the meat of the presentation, I would like to take a moment to introduce Dan Garcia, who's our Senior Program Manager, and Melissa Gutierrez, who's our Business Analyst. And I'm getting a text message. My daughter seemed to be in the neighborhood, and she may be here. I don't know where she is, but want to start with thanking the support this committee has provided for Office of Cybersecurity. And right from the get-go, from the initial stages of assembling a plan together or a program together, talking to all the individuals and moving through the process, carrying the legislation with the legislative support, we have come a long way. That long way includes having planning committee and advisory committee, and starting with nothing to 1 million and all the way up to where we are today. So that has been a significant progress in that process. So moving on to page number 3, here, the crux of the issue. What is cybersecurity? To define it at a very easy to understand way, it is an art of protecting the information technology networks, the data, and the devices, the networking devices, for example, that makes the network. And the idea behind this is to what is called a CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, to provide the necessary means and ensuring that the confidentiality of the information, the confidentiality of the network, and the confidentiality of the systems that we operate is, their integrity is not compromised and it's available when we need it. That's the CIA triad. And underneath that definition, we have some common vulnerabilities. What are the consequences if those vulnerabilities materialize, and the defenses that we currently have in place to control or to mitigate the risk or to eliminate that risk in terms of defenses and controls. So, for example, credential misuse. So if somebody were to misuse a credential, what can we do? So one of the elements that we can implement is multi-factor authentication to minimize the risk coming out of that. With that said, further down in the slide deck, you will see something going. But I'm happy to report today, one of our last systems that does not have multi-factor authentication in the state is being implemented today as we speak. So share will be on multi-factor authentication today. It started at 9 a.m. We implemented that over the weekend. So users are going through the registration process and getting it there. So our response is a multifaceted approach because it's ever-increasing threats and managing that risk by the criticality and the opportunity on how to mitigate that. Moving on to the next slide. What is the mission? So this was briefly touched this morning, Chair and members of the committee. The statutory mission for Office of Cybersecurity is to promote cybersecurity here in public sector in the state of New Mexico. One thing that we can say for sure, based on the legislation and the support, OCS provides services to all executive branch agency. As you know, further in the slide deck, we have more details, but about 76 agencies exist, 76 agencies, boards and commission that exist in the executive branch, and we provide services to all of them. And out of that 76, 3 of them do not have networks, so you will see 73 further down in the slide deck. OCS provides service to interested public entities such as K through 12 higher educational institutions, counties, municipalities, tribal entities, water and wastewater systems. So this is where it becomes voluntary, right? We cannot mandate it. So in this morning discussion, we briefly touched on this topic. So there is a significant difference between being mandated and being, voluntary. So legislative and judiciary entities have declined our services. So just a point of note there. And the other aspect is OCS is not currently funded to support all public entities. So that's also something that we want to make a note of. Overall program objectives. OCS fills its mission by providing enterprise-level cybersecurity program. What is that enterprise level cybersecurity program look like? What does it do? The first and foremost is to protect the privacy and the security of state-owned or state-operated networks, applications, and devices. Establish good governance framework through policies, procedures, and training. Coordinate cyber incident response. Serve as a central point of contact for anything cyber-related for public entities, and provide support and guidance to both advisory and planning committees, and help them walk through informed decision-making in terms of analyzing risk, gap discovery, mitigation, et cetera, for each one of those clients, because they may be from different sectors or different groups. So if you move on to page number 6, here are the key services that we offer. Attack surface management. Today morning, we briefly touched on this, like, outside in and inside out kind of thing. So the outside in is the attack surface management. What can I see in this building that could be a potentially risk, as an example, right? And from the inside, what can I see as a risk? Things of that nature. And how do we assess that? How do we quantify that is where the risk assessment comes in, followed by cyber security user awareness training. Then we do the validation by doing penetration testing, and all this is coordinated by our Security Operations Center, which was one of the things that was mandated by the law for us to do. And we currently have a Security Operations Center, which we'll talk in details, and where many of these details in the slide deck is coming from. So moving on to page number 7. This is our portfolio of entities that we are currently serving. So from being very fragmented, coming from a very federated type environment, cyber is one of the fabric that connects every single state employees together, in addition to a few others that we may currently have. So state agencies, as you see, there are 73 counties, there are 33 municipalities, 105, K through 12, 188. And higher educational institution, 19, tribal, 23, judicial, 18 entities within the judiciary, and legislative is 1, and water and wastewater, currently we have 73 that we are planning to provide services to. So this is the portfolio of service. So 534 entities is what this body is supporting to have a better cybersecurity posture for the state of New Mexico. Attack surface management, that's the outside looking in, there is a gap of 17%. Not everybody participate because we cannot make them, right? We have to go through the voluntary approach. Similarly, you can see vulnerability management as a service. This is where we scan from the inside, seeing what gaps exist across the ecosystem. And you can see there is a gap. Similarly, with penetration testing, similarly with cybersecurity awareness training, et cetera. So those gaps can manifest into one of the topic of discussion that we had this morning, which is it a risk? Absolutely, the answer is yes, it is a risk. In terms of subscriber engagement, what do we do with those subscribers who subscribe to our services? We do compliance reviews. We do the monthly scans. We do the penetration testing and report on them and do the follow-up actions on what is needed. We also do the technology and cybersecurity support desk. So when somebody calls in and says, hey, this is happening, is there a concern? We do the drill down, navigate through what the issue is, see if it is a security concern, and provide the necessary support. We do the incident triage. We take in the incoming information, triage it, and provide the necessary sources to address those risky items. We do threat analysis. We also touched on this morning. I'm very proud about what the Office of Cybersecurity did when there was an imminent threat from Republic of Iran. we gathered all the information because at any given time, we are dealing with 1 terabyte of data pretty much on a daily basis. That's a lot of data. If somebody were to say the humans are involved in the data analysis part, of course they are, but it is beyond their comprehension to analyze 1 terabyte of data. So we do use machines and automation to filter the noise and get to the meat of the issue. Moving on to slide number 9, cybersecurity standards. As you can see at the bottom, Office of Cybersecurity holds all New Mexico executive branch agencies to NIST 800-53 moderate impact security posture. So if we have the language and the support, we will extend it to all parties interacting with the state. Just a brief sample of what is the cybersecurity risk assessment looks like on page number 10. This is the most comprehensive risk assessment the state has ever gone through, thanks to the administration's support on mandating every agency complete this on time. And all agencies completed that. So here is the sample of overall average compliance score, which is 2.81 out of 4, which is about 70%. And as you can see, there are areas such as governance policies, procedures can be improved. And part of that is not new because we operated for so long in a federated and fragmented model. This is year 3 of Office of Cybersecurity being in existence. So we are slowly chipping away at it by issuing those policies and procedures that is needed. And more validation is happening on the field. So if somebody says, oh, I have this, we don't accept it at face value. We do the validation and say, hang on a second, you said this, but this is what we are saying. Oh, here is the gap. Go address the gap. Next, moving on to slide number 11, cybersecurity user awareness training. This is awesome. This industry average in the government sector across the U.S. is 17.9. That's how many failures happen during cybersecurity awareness training. But based on the training and the automation that we have implemented and how quickly we respond to somebody's accidentally clicking on, hey, your Amazon package has arrived, we were able to nail that down to 3.9%. So, which is a huge win for us, given the fact where we were 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I could not even report on this. And slide number 12 gives you a snapshot of funding for enterprise cyber program. On the top are the specials that we received so far. And, the bottom table indicates where we spend our scarce resources on the operating budget, how we categorize them into 200, 300, 400 categories, and 500 categories. The 500 categories is the other finance uses. Because we are administratively attached, that's the cost that we provide to our parent organization to provide us the administrative support for us. Water and wastewater cybersecurity is something that we picked up during last federal administration. And I'm happy to report we got kudos from the prior administration, especially EPA and Office of the National Director on Intelligence, which deals with infrastructure security at the White House. They were very impressed with the awesome work that we put together on the plan for. And we are moving forward with that plan. This is coming out of our budget to do the best we can. And based on the risk and the profiles, we have selected 73 water and wastewater authority systems for us to extend our services. And this is being done with, in collaboration with federal partners and state partners. On the state side, we are working with Department of Environment and DHS-CM. And on the federal side, we are working with Critical Infrastructure Security Agency to make this happen. And OCS has engaged in the outreach, and we have implemented a GRC-based system, and CISA is going to administer the network scanning, and we are going to work with them to provide them a template for incident response plans and do some desktop exercise so that this critical infrastructure sector can be protected much better. Quickly going over slide number 14, which is the state and local cybersecurity grant. So for year one, we received $2.4 million. This brief snapshot gives you a representation of who's participating. About 26 local entities applied, and we closed out 2 of the projects already. And they came in and did, this is FEMA and CISA came in and did a program review of how good our program is going. I'm happy to announce no findings, both on the program side and on the fiscal side. So we did extremely well. What are some of the additional achievements? So I talked about MFA. We issued, working with collaboratively with the Department of Information Technology, we issued the generative AI policy. We have streamlined our e-discovery policies and the user training associated with them. We also issued the statewide cyber incident notification so that if an incident happens, they have an obligation to notify our office so that we can keep track of how many incidents happen, what is the root cause of the issue, etc. Then we also leverage the enterprise security features so that we can have a consistent set of telemetry or metrics to monitor how the agencies are doing, and adopted a unified security platform and solution. So that brings us to the last slide. What are significant challenges, right? We'll talk more about this, but some of the significant challenges that happened in our space is the federal changes. They eliminated funding for Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is MSISAC. So this is an agency that slices and dices data at the federal level and pass on the threat intelligence to us. That is moving to a fee-based model because feds won't support it. There is reduction in cybersecurity workforce at the federal level. So we have to pick up the tab and run with it because there's not much resources out there for us to depend on, which includes threat intelligence concerning nation-state actors. And reductions of cybersecurity agencies and services further pushes us to take on more responsibility, and the termination of NCSR, which is a function that CISA used to provide, is to do the review of the cybersecurity programs at each one of these entities. So with that, I thank you and stand for any questions.
Do we have any questions? Representative Garrett?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, Raj. Really appreciate it. Just a couple of questions. On slide 4, you mentioned that legislative and judiciary entities have declined Office of Cybersecurity Services. What are they doing?
They may have their own program. I do not have insight or visibility into what they do. They claim they do, but we have no way of validating or verifying what they do. And the effectiveness and the efficacy of those programs are unknown. But at least I can say on the executive branch side, we are following these federal standards or the NIST framework, and we are holding every single entity within that umbrella to that standard, and we are constantly measuring, and we have tons of data points that can be discussed in a more private setting.
Thank you. And my second question, Madam Chair, is on your final slide, the elimination of threat intelligence concerning nation-state actors. Shouldn't that concern us? I mean, the, what's her name? Tulsi. Gilbert. I mean, they're closing down major intelligence oversight of the known identified international players that have tried to do and have succeeded in many cases against our country.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, and representative, yes, that is true. So our workload has significantly increased in the last 3-4 months, significantly, right? Because we need to do the analysis, we need to do the follow-up, and look into our roster of inventory of what we currently have, how that can manifest into a vulnerability that could potentially bring us down. So the workload that we are thrusted upon has significantly multifold increase.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is scary, especially in a state that has multiple national labs. And then my last question is, this morning our AI expert said AI is more important than cybersecurity. And how does that work? I mean, I'm thinking of firewalls that AI can start doing things that a year ago we didn't even imagine.
Yeah, Chair and members of the committee, yes, it is a scary equation for us to balance. Because if we are using machine learning to slice through volumes of data, they are using the same techniques, tactics to do the penetration, to do the malicious act. Because at the end of the day, it all comes to data, right? They want to make a buck or two out of abusing somebody's privileged data. And the state is very rich with data. And that's where they want to go. So they may use AI to poke holes into our environment, our security posture. We may need to use AI to strengthen our defenses. So it's a very interesting balancing act that we have to follow. And most of the states, based on my understanding, because I interact with my counterparts in other states, majority of the states take a very defensive approach. They are not into offensive approach, and that is pretty much in the wheelhouse of the feds. And with these changes, that is being left to the states to now deal with. So we have to keep a defensive posture, but also be ready to make some offensive posture as well.
Thank you for your insights.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you. Representative next, Senator Bergman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'll let you reply.
Thank you.
Yeah,
As
that's
she's
fine.
at the door, she doesn't know it. Press the button.
And do introduce her.
It's my daughter.
On slide 10, the third bullet point
Yes.
says it's about the cybersecurity risk assessment, and it says that sample validation indicates a significant gap between reported and actual compliance. What is that actual gap?
So,
Or what is the realistic number?
So, maturity is the realistic number here. So how mature is your business processes and the underlying IT systems that supports those business processes? So for example, if you are supposed to have a password policy, once again, this is just an example. Yeah, we have a password policy, but is the password policy also defined, oh, it needs to be these many characters along with alphanumeric, blah, blah, blah. Because it goes to, I came from a audit world, so there are controls. You validate the control saying, does it exist? Then you work on validating the effectiveness of that control, right? So it is one of those things where what the agency currently have and how effectively it may be operating is there may be some gaps. And that gap can only be addressed through education, awareness, and then upgrading or modernizing their environment with some awareness.
That was a perfect description. Thank you.
And thank you, Chair and members of the committee, and thank you, Senator.
But on slide 14, what is the state-sponsored policy template library development project? It's within that. It's got under governance and planning in that table.
So, do you want to take that, Todd? I would like to introduce Todd. Todd is our general counsel, and he was instrumental in developing the language and drafting and working with market words for the Cybersecurity Act.
Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members. So the policy development project. So there's policy and then there's program. And the policies are the set of standards that we're going to hold ourselves to as an organization. And in order to be NIST compliant, you have to have both the policies and you have to have the implementation of that policy. What we have found during our risk assessments and in conversations with the subscribers to the services is they don't have the written roadmap to how they're going to implement cybersecurity. So we've contracted with a vendor. We're working with that vendor to develop templates that local governments, agencies, other branches of governments can pull in, customize to their organization, create their cybersecurity policy. For example, we mentioned password policy just a second ago. They will have a written document that says your password's going to be 12 characters, it's going to have a number, it's going to have a capital, it's going to have a special character, and then they will use that to gauge whether their actual practices are in alignment with what their desires are. So we're developing those templates for all public bodies that want to use them. Thank you.
If I may add more to that, Chair and members of the committee. If I may add more to that, provide some color to the comments that Todd made. It brings consistency, Madam Chair and members of the committee, so that we know this is how the policy is, this is what the baseline for that standard looks like, and it gives an opportunity where to identify the gap is and close the gap, if there is any. So it helps with the standardization across the ecosystem, because one local subscriber may have a one-page policy, one of the mature agency may have a 40-page policy. So we are trying to standardize and understand the baseline so that we can improve upon the cybersecurity posture.
Perfect. And then my final question is, what is the co-issue generative AI policy?
Chair and members of the committee, there are two aspects to AI. One is generative AI, where you use it as a tool to gain some efficiencies, right? So what is the average weather in New Mexico? Now, AI, based on all the data that it has ingested, it can give you a more granular response, saying it like, 87.6 degrees is what the average is, or something to that effect based on the time. But that is one portion of AI. The second large component of AI is the AI that policymakers such as you are all trying to regulate, which is the large language model. So the generative AI model is being misinterpreted or understood by many within the state organization. So many of the state organizations currently use some elements of AI, and majority of that some element is generative AI, such as Copilot or ChatGPT, right? So what that policy provides is a safe use policy, for a lack of a better term. Feel free to correct me, Todd, because Todd and we were very instrumental in working with the Department of Information Technology to collaborate to put this policy together. It provides the necessary guardrail to what not to do or what to do, right? Do not throw sensitive data at a publicly available large language model. Those are the guardrails that we are talking about. Because once that data is thrown at that large language model, we have no way of pulling it back, or we have no way of undoing that, and now sensitive data is on the open. Do you want to add anything more to that, Todd?
Yeah, Madam Chair, members. Yeah, so the policy is just like the policies we just discussed. It is a set of guidelines that agencies now have to follow in the executive branch before they can deploy their generative AI. So we're not going to train them on confidential data. If you're going to, anything that's public, if you want to use it internally and train it on your data, you have to have data loss protection measures in place. If you're going to publish something that's public facing and you expect members of the public to rely on this thing that you've created, you're going to indicate on the document itself or on the advertisement or in the brochure that this was generated by AI so that the consumers can know we're going to ask questions about the origin of this. So it's to protect consumers, it's to protect our data, and it's to ensure that everybody's playing by the same rules when they're deploying these systems.
Just to add to that, Chair and members of the committee and Senator, this helps us get there with the right mindset, right? We are taking a data first, data protection first, and AI smart approach rather than AI first and jumping in. It's a little bit calibrated of an approach, I would say, but it helps us be cognizant of all the elements of risk or any surprises that we may have to deal with.
Great, yeah, I was excited to learn that that existed. And I was wondering, I looked for it briefly on, Google and the Do It website. I don't know where else it might be, but can you send us that policy?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Great, I would love
Thank
to
you,
see
Chair
that.
and members of the committee. We will definitely send it to the committee members here.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Senator. Next is Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I, as you know, very involved with you through this whole effort. Madam Chair, so I guess I misunderstood what you said earlier versus what you said just now. I think I heard you say just now that you're not aware of what the policies are in the other agencies, i.e. legislative, judicial, et cetera. Then how are they, based on what you said earlier today, they're meeting the minimum set of standards. How are they doing transactions with the state government now if we don't know what their policies are on security right now?
So, Chair and members of the committee, very excellent question, Senator. So, does a standard exist and has the state pivot to a standard? Yeah, the answer is yes, it's 800-53 moderate. Now, we are working through the process within the executive branch to see where the gaps are to meet that standard, right? Some exceed, some may not be there yet, and we may need some hand-holding. Very similarly, if I have the support of the policymakers, I can do the same with the legislative branch or any other branch or even the local government to give you a broader perspective of where the larger gaps are. For example, if once again, this is just an example, if water authorities are not using multi-factor authentication, that could be a huge risk that we need to focus and prioritize to mitigate. And until we do that analysis, we would not know. So most of the policies should be public-facing documents, published, validated by independent audits and whatnot, but I do not know, or I cannot opine on it as is.
Okay, so Madam Chair, I guess then my next question would be, logically, is there an automated way that puts up a firewall that doesn't let you do a transaction with the state government if you don't meet the state's minimum standards?
Chair and members of the committee, technology do exist that can move us in that direction, but the disruption could be impacting constituents in some shape or form. So we need to understand if we have the authority, definitely we can look into that in moving that direction so that we can provide the necessary validation that all the entities interacting with the states are being held to that same standard as the executive branch agencies.
So Madam Chair, then I guess I'm really confused now because it just seems like it really doesn't matter what you're doing at the state level at this point, because if you're allowing the legislature and the judiciary to just enter, exit, submit this, request that payment, the whatever, then that's a wide open door. That's a sliding door that's wide open. And any bad actor can just crawl in the building from there.
Chair and
or am I just totally misreading that?
Chair and members of the committee and Senator, it is currently open for interpretation. Todd, do you want to elaborate? Maybe there's a better way to capture that risk?
Depending Madam Chair, Senator. So I'm going to use an example of another situation. Our vendors, they are interacting with our environment, but we don't have any visibility into what their cybersecurity posture is. And there is no test that we can give them, or there's no governing body that has given them a seal of approval and said, they are compliant with X, Y, or Z, you can do business with them. So far. But we are going to work towards getting something like that for New Mexico, whether it's us creating the test or sending the vendors off to somebody else to get the test, so they can come in and say, this vendor is meeting X standard, if we decide what it is. With respect to our co-branches of government, we have zero visibility, and we don't have the ability to ask them for that seal of approval, the proof of compliance. It's not within our statutory authority right now.
Oh, I appreciate that. And so, Chair, today, with the slide that you had that showed the testing and the, validation or whatever, we do that to the state government, the executive branch that is required to adhere to this law that we created. Why wouldn't we just give that to the other agencies and say, before we are more than happy to do a transaction with you, whatever it may be, but before we do that with you, we're going to run a test on your system to make sure that you're not creating vulnerabilities for us. Why wouldn't you do that? And it seems to me that would be a proactive way to keep the bad actors out.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator, it does sound proactive. And right now, we can look at all of our agencies where they're all on the same platform. They're all getting the same security stance. They're all complying with the same risk assessment. And we'll push that off to vendors and start expecting them to give us that verification. And from a policy perspective, it makes sense to us that everybody that comes into the state system should be meeting those minimum standards that are verified through consistently applied processes. It does make sense.
Right. Well, I'd like to know more about that. I know you want to keep moving on, but it just seems to me like it really doesn't matter what the state's doing. I mean, if the barn door is, wide open for anybody to walk through it, and we're not testing them before they walk in, they're bringing all sorts of flus inside the building, all sorts of illness into the building. I just totally, that doesn't jive at all with what our intention of this legislation was. So I'm going to have to dig a little deeper into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I agree. We've been discussing it a little bit, and maybe we can bring more into the conversation, bring you into. All right. I just have a question. So over the last few years, we've been trying to get a cybersecurity fund. Do we still need it, or are our agencies not getting infiltrated? Are they just working really well? Can you tell me?
Chair and members of the committee, Chair, the opportunity and the need do exist, right? Because if you look at the brief history of Office of Cybersecurity, every single legislative session, either 30-day or 60-day session, we have come in front of you asking for money. We have been blessed to some extent to have some base operating budget, but everything has been run out of one-time monies. So given the fact that it's been 3 years and most of our funding are with a specified time limit and for a specific purpose as specials, we have implemented those, and now we are at a critical juncture where it is termed as operations. So if we do not have a base budget increase, all the valuable things that we implemented cannot be considered operation, because I need to come back and ask for money to continue those operations. And those are the operation that provides us with all these data points. And based on the data points, we are making data-centric decisions, prioritizing based on risk and other factors. So if we do not get consistent recurring funding, and which we have discussed in this forum multiple times in the past, this is once again based on available information. We are potentially looking at somewhere in the mid-30s million for an operating budget, but it's going to take time unless you guys bless me with the funding request.
So, but the agencies are doing okay. I mean, how are the agencies really doing?
So for the agencies, at least if I can, for this example purposes, Chair and members of the committee, if I can keep just the executive branch agencies, we provide them the service. So they don't have anything for them to react to other than when we say, hey, you left that door open or the lock is not working right, can you fix the lock? Then that's where their involvement comes in fixing that particular lock. So where agencies also potentially could be looking at, Chair and members of the committee, a large cost is outdated and unsupported systems. So for example, if I'm using this device and it is not being supported, that's a large cost that the state would be looking at, because you need to replace that with whatever agency has this type of device across the ecosystem. So we need to be, that's where the cost comes in. Sorry, Dan has a comment. Yes, ma'am. So, Chair, members of the committee, this is Dan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members. To answer your question, to answer your question, it's, and I know Raja can't say it, but it's a ticking time bomb. We have, I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities that we're looking at. We're looking at things daily. We're constantly putting out fires, every single day, every single moment. And any one of those fires potentially could be millions of dollars that we have to come up with. So we've been very, very lucky that nothing has happened, but the potential is there. And so there's two folds. There's how much money we need to fix all of the problems that we have, and how much money we need if one of those, I think it was 22,000 vulnerabilities, critical vulnerabilities we saw last year gets through, how do we fix that? And so we're just doing the best we can to keep things contained if they do happen.
Chair and members of the committee. Chair and members of the committee, some of the technical details with some sensitivity can be done in a closed session, if possible. Yes, we can definitely, yeah.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Sorry, I didn't recognize.
Oh,
I'll second her motion then.
Madam Chair, I motion for a closed session.
All right, you have a motion and a second?
Do we have the material for them?